That's TMI, the Meaningful Insights podcast, delving into the heart of human-centered professions.
That's TMI is recorded on the lands of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to all the traditional custodians of the lands on which you are joining from today. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us for this next installment of That's TMI. You are rejoined by your hosts, Chris, Smita, and Justin, and a special guest today. But I'm going to hand over to Smita to let her introduce our guest as we explore the topic of cultural considerations today.
I'm really excited about today's guest. We are joined by Simangaliso Nyoni, a cultural practice lead at MacKillop Family Services. Simangaliso, you have such an interesting background and you do such incredible work at MacKillop Family Services. First of all, start off with a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about what you do.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. So, a beautiful introduction, by the way. A little bit about me. I am a coffee lover as well, addicted to coffee. That's a good thing to be addicted to. So I have my long black in the morning, religiously have my long black. And I'm a runner. I love running. I've done a marathon.
You're on your own there in this crowd, Simangaliso. That's definitely a unique skill.
Yeah, there's even a bigger story of why I started running. But honestly, it's been one of the best things that I've taken. But in terms of my role, so I actually walked into the doors of MacKillop Family Services in a very different role as a principal practitioner, and a little bit about how then I've landed into the cultural practice lead space. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but my role is a cultural practice lead. My main focus is on supporting multicultural communities as well in terms of organizationally and international role as well, looking at our culturally responsive practices as it is everyone's responsibility to be culturally responsive. There are a few parts about my role. I can talk all day about it, but it's actually a very fulfilling role. And I feel very privileged to be a part of that, a part of a one woman's team. Why is that term so gendered? One man, one woman's team at the moment, but that's actually not true. I've got a whole lot of tribe in terms of the community that we have at MacKillop.
I love that, Simangaliso, and you immediately make me think about language and how important our use of language is. You were about to almost default reflexive action there, say, one man and job. And there's so many things like that I've become very aware of since working here. Things like, to take a shot at something, to take a stab in the dark. Like, there's all these expressions that actually, when you sit and think about them, you go, hold on a minute. Where did that come from?
That's really dark.
Yeah. Like, if you unpack some of these expressions, why do we have them? Why do we use them? And so on that thread, how does language play in to cultural considerations?
Language is huge because I always say to people that I do a lot of cultural consults, right? And it's so interesting to me. One of the things or the key themes that come up a lot is how when people are speaking about the people that they support, and I'm also very mindful of language to call people clients or call people young people, or call people families. I always say your starting point has to be, what does that person want to be called, right? We have a language that we have in our system for different reasons, for documentation and stuff. But I think one of the things that I've had to sharpen a lot in my role was this deep listening and really tracking and being attuned to what people are saying to me more than what they're asking. What are you actually saying to me? And I've noticed that in our language, that's when you can see why people come up with the practices that they do come up with, because they've made judgments. There's a lot of unconscious bias and well-meaning intention sometimes that actually is not congruent with what maybe a family or young person might be wanting support or think is a priority as well. So I think language, unless you make an intentional commitment to be kind of really mindful of, why do I use that language? Where did it come from? And who does it serve? Because language serves certain people, right? It serves me when I type in, my documentation, and I feel so good about the fact that I put together a case note on our system and I read so well. But if a family had to come 5 years later and look at that documentation, does it serve them and their story? And if the answer is no, then I have to rewrite that case note, don't I? So I think language plays a huge part because, again, we can't ignore the fact that systemically there's still so many things that haven't been decolonized. We're not even close to that. So unless we actually start, I think that decolonizing process has to start from your mind. And it starts, for me, I think it might look different to someone who was born in Australia. I wasn't born in Australia, but I'm a descendant of people that did experience colonization, because Zimbabwe, where I'm from, is a former British colony, right? And there were things that my parents or my grandparents told me even prior to me coming to Australia that I cringe at now, but you could see that was a legacy of the history that they'd experienced. Because one thing that I was told, I think, when I was coming to Australia was like, go out there, go and do well. We're really proud of you. And then there was an emphasis but be very mindful that you don't upset white people. You look at them in the eye, because white people, if you don't look them in the eye, they will think that you're not being truthful. And I can see that those were messages for them wanting me to survive, right? But now I look back and I'm like, but there was also a part of you without you realizing that you're saying culturally what we do with not looking at people in the eyes, you're saying that's not okay. Negate that and dismiss that. So long answer to the question that you asked. It's just, it opens a whole kind of worms around how we actually move around the world, or we move in spaces, and language is key.
It's interesting how the emphasis was on adapting to other perceived culture rather than, for example, in Australia, us perhaps potentially being more aware of some of those cultural nuances, beliefs, values, differences. I think here in this room, we all know that there are people that don't look you in the eye for a whole range of reasons. And it doesn't mean that it's dishonesty or disrespect or anything like that. It can be simply that is just what feels natural to them. It could be cultural. It could be a whole range of reasons, right?
Could be just social anxiety. It could be anything. You're right.
Simangaliso, I wonder too, like, having experienced you in the workplace, you're often kind of looked to be a cultural guide by people in the room. But I've always noticed that you garner respect in those spaces. And I think it's because you have this beautiful warmth about you. You're welcoming, but at the same time, you're a fierce advocate. And I just wonder how filling that space is for you. Has that always come naturally to you? Or is that something that you've had to kind of learn how to enter those spaces?
Wow, that's a very beautiful reflection. My head just went bigger. I'm like, say that again. No, I'm kidding. To be honest, I think a lot of it has had to do with kind of my lived experience and how I was raised. I always share this story, and with kind of a lot of gratitude that I was raised by my grandparents. My grandfather, my grandmother passed away when I was younger. And I think sometimes I have this thing where I feel like when I speak, sometimes I can hear his legacy in my voice. And I mention him as kind of a pivotal person in terms of shaping who I am, because he was one of 30-something children born in a polygamy, family. His dad had 3 wives, but as he was growing up, he had to then pave the way and raise his other half siblings and stuff like that. But I watched my grandfather have the most difficult conversations when I was young. Those conversations that you think, oh, I want F to swallow me. But what was interesting to me was he was always intentional about exposing me to those conversations, even though I was young. And I didn't particularly understand it when I was younger. And these are adult conversations. I shouldn't even be privy to this conversation. But I think it was part of his legacy to me that treat people with kindness and warmth. Always have a conversation with someone and leaving them feeling more fulfilled than like feeling like you've taken something away from them and you've depleted them. Even if you don't necessarily agree with them, but also speak with conviction. If you believe something really to be quite true, speak with conviction, right? And don't be apologetic for that, but also ensure that you actually leave room for growth. Just because you know a couple of things doesn't mean you know everything. So always leave room for learning. And I think for me, that's partly how I want to be in spaces, and that's how I want to be received. And I think that's what kind of carries me. Not always. I have times where I've gone, where did that come from? I think I could have put that through a filter of kindness a bit before it came up. It's just come out. And I'm also not afraid to apologize. And I'm not afraid to take accountability as well. So I have often gone back to conversations and gone, you know what? I could have probably had that conversation with you outside of an audience. And then I do apologize, and I do commit to doing better.
And can I ask you, Simangaliso, and I think part of that is finding your voice. And I can only imagine that moving to Australia, that in itself was a journey and a process. It can shift over time, and it can look different in different spaces. Is there anything that you can share from your journey that you think was pivotal in how you've kind of shaped and found your voice over time?
I love that question. I think there are quite a number of things, I think, that potentially have been, spaces where I think I've believed in myself, because I think that's very important. That's really core, like how you see yourself as well often then kind of gets mirrored to you, right? How you see yourself. So when I came to Australia, I was 19. I knew no one in Australia. I remember getting off a Tullamarine and just going, crap. I had a backpack, right? And I had a backpack. Literally, my backpack was full of dreams and passion. And the only thing that I'd actually say to people back home was, I'm going to Australia. I'm going to make something out of myself. I don't know how it looks like. And then I would map out a vision board of where I wanted to be. Like I would map it out in like in 5 years, I want to be this. And in 5 years, I want to, and every time I would kind of hit a milestone. For me, was confirmation again that it wasn't, the sacrifices of my family were not in vain. And it was huge, because when I left Zimbabwe, the most important people believed in me, but no one else did. Like, it was very interesting, because I did extremely well in primary school, struggled in high school, literally struggled. I wouldn't even pass a single thing. And now what I understand of that is kind of multiple things, including the fact that I'm a person who can focus on one thing and do it really well. The minute you try and throw too many things at me, it's just my brain just work. And the way the system in Zimbabwe is built is primary school, four subjects, I would ace those. They double those subjects when you go into high school. And I'm like, how do people study for 8 subjects? How do you do it? 8, 9 subjects. And because I wasn't doing well in high school, I would get a lot of kind of bad reports. With really, again, going back to communication and language. And I think, especially when you're an educator, be mindful of what you write on your school reports. One of my reports that still pains my mom is a report when I was 13, where a teacher was, because we used to clean our own classrooms in Zimbabwe, a teacher was like, Simangaliso will always be good at sweeping classes. That's the only thing that she's really good at. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with sweeping classes. Like, a clean house is next to godliness, so he can take that. But I think at that time it brought a lot of shame to my family, because they didn't understand the difference between how I was doing in primary school and how I was doing in high school. But that was the drive for me, I think. I was like, no, you don't know me. I'm built for, bigger things. So when I did get my first degree, it was like, it was a lie. He said I wouldn't be anything. And then when I got my first job, I'm like, see, got my own money now. And then the advocacy part and being fierce around it started even when I first came to Australia. Then everything started to fall into place. But most importantly, I think for me, it was being in spaces where I was helping and supporting others. It was being in spaces where people could say, okay, even people back home would see me. I post stuff of my achievements, and people have a different opinion about that. It's like, oh, you want to show off and stuff. I posted because I know there's a girl child out there, or there's someone in Zimbabwe. So going, okay, so you left Zimbabwe, and you went and made something out of yourself. And I usually sometimes get that feedback. And I think that's the driver for me, You said I couldn't do it, but look at me now. I almost want to sing like sometimes. So those are the things of going, I managed to change the trajectory of my story. My story, where it started, I shouldn't be where I am.
My partner, her parents immigrated from southern Italy. And there's a photo that sits at Anna's father's house of them getting off the boat with one suitcase, one kid in hand. Her mother was pregnant at the time, but that suitcase was all they had. And I often look at that photo and we'll ask her dad about really the courage it took to take that step. And you had me wondering around, what would you say gave that courage to take that step to go into the unknown with this bag full of dreams? As you said, I wonder, what would be your take on that? Do you feel like it was a courageous decision? And what fueled that courage?
When I look at a 19-year-old, like in this day and time, and I see them, I'm like, I was so young, but I thought I was an adult. I think what fueled me was I had no other option. So there were two options. I come here and I dive into the unknown, and I believe that whatever I have in me is going to propel me to where I need to go. The other option was that I shrink and I withdraw, and I am exactly some of the stories that were said about me. So those were the two options. And I actually wasn't willing to do the other option of just, proving that person right or proving some of my story. So I think what fueled it is this opportunity to rewrite my story. I have a lot of people that I went to high school with that haven't had the same opportunity. So I had an opportunity. I think ideally everyone wants to stay in their country of origin if things are working right. But I had a different opportunity, and I was like, I'm going to miss this opportunity. And I think that's one thing for me, not missing opportunity in conversation, not missing an opportunity to say to someone, look, that was amazing. Not missing an opportunity to say to someone, that's really brave. Not missing an opportunity to apologize, or not missing an opportunity for a teachable moment in a conversation, because inside I'm like, oh, crap, I can't say that. So I missed opportunity. Like I didn't want to miss an opportunity to do better for myself.
And that, I suppose, takes my mind in a slightly kind of, different trajectory, Simangaliso. I'm thinking about what opportunity looks like and how we even understand and conceptualize opportunity when perhaps often we see for our multicultural communities, unless there's representation, how do we even know what opportunity looks like? And one of the things that you mentioned in your story just then was how by posting out some of the things that you're doing, that actually there are young people out there looking at you and kind of saying, oh, she's doing that, I could do that too. To share a little bit of my own story, I would say that there was a period maybe 5 years ago, I was in a leadership role, and a young woman kind of, as I was leaving that role, wrote me a card, and she referred to me as a leader of colour. She was a young woman of colour, and she was talking about how inspiring it was to have seen a leader of colour. That was the first time I'd ever even thought of myself as a leader of colour. I had never actually had that kind of thought of myself, but to see it kind of reflected through someone else's eyes, and then suddenly think, oh, there's a lot of responsibility that kind of comes with this. What's your thoughts when we're thinking about cultural considerations, the importance of representation, and do you feel weight with the responsibility of your role?
Yeah, I do. The reason why I'm hesitating is because of the power of what was written in your card. To have someone saying a leader of color, and you're walking around and embodying that and not even knowing, but to have that said back to you, it's so amazing. And I think that then speaks volumes of you and how you show up in spaces, right? Because I think that's really important for us. It's not about what comes out of our mouth. It's about whether that's actually aligned with how we move around the world and how we treat people and how we represent ourselves. In terms of going back to your question, I do feel a lot of weight, because I think I would take it back to, the comment that I made first around kind of really decluttering and decolonizing my mind. It's really important to me to do the work. There's a book out there around doing the work. It's really important for me to do the work, the internal work as well, because my greatest fear is that if I don't do that, in my oh, I'm taking on this role and I'm going to do things a bit better, that I might be harming people because I'm one voice. And I'm one voice with an experience, with the experiences that I've had, but with also some privilege that I've had. Like I'm now as a Black African woman in a leadership role, right? And I have to be mindful that sometimes I speak of things and I speak and say I look after multicultural communities, but I'm also speaking from a place of an educated woman who earns money every fortnight, has choices in terms of traveling and educate and a whole lot of things, right? So I have to be also mindful that in my kind of feeling like I'm representing communities, am I truly representing all of communities? And I'm very always try and be clear that I'm actually not a representative of all multicultural communities. But having said that, I can do that without also dismissing that it's taken me strides and steps to get here. I didn't show up in a leadership role. I didn't show up educated. I didn't show up I had to work for that. So when another person looks at me, I want them to go, how did he do it? And my first response would be, you can do it, before I even tell them the formula, right? My starting point is belief that they can do it as well. So there is a lot of weight, and particularly in this role that I'm in, because it didn't exist before I started at MacKillop, the cultural practice lead, a role in terms of a focus for multicultural communities, but it also speaks volumes of the commitment of the organization to have created that role. But it's even worse because now, even after my time is done, someone's going to pick up documents and look at the footsteps and going, oh, so this is where she started. Where was her heart at? Where was her intentions at? And if people go, oh, maybe she could have done this a little bit better, or maybe she could have considered that, but you can see the echoing of her heart and the intentions in it of being inclusive, then I've done my part.
That's beautiful.
I'm interested in that idea of when you spoke about having to do the work yourself. And
Yep.
as a Australian white, am I middle-aged? I don't want to say middle-aged, but,
Self-proclaimed middle-aged man.
male who wants to be as inclusive as possible, who is probably a people pleaser as well, but is becoming more and more aware of my own bias.
Mm-hmm.
I'm often kind of get stuck in this loop of, I know what I want to be. What's the work I need to do to get there? And I'm wondering, that's probably a really big question.
Oh, gosh, yes.
But I'm worried, even maybe starting with some common mistakes you see people make on that journey.
Oh, if you do not have people in your life and your tribe that will lovingly call you out on things, therefore you will have a lot of blind sides. I always say there's a lot of blind sides. I go, am I doing this well? Am I kind? I ask those questions. And then I have moments where I would have like my core group of friends going, okay, do you want just me to hold your hand right now? Or do you want an honest of what I'm observing? And if, like, depending on how robust I am and like what kind of a day I have, I'll choose an option. But also just because that person is reflected back on me, I also have to put it through my sieve, right? I have to go, okay, I see where you're coming from, but does that actually resonate with what I think is happening? And I've had some reflections back where I haven't taken them on board. And an example of that is I had recently had someone get in touch with me. They had missed years of my life and they got in touch with me. And their reflection back at me was that they didn't think I should be where I am. They think they're surprised that I'm just still where I am, because their whole opinion of me was that they thought I'll be in New York in an office in New York and doing better than what I'm doing. And it really put me down for quite some days, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm lagging behind. I need to run a bit, not run a marathon in my life. And I was like, and then it took days. And I think after the trigger and the emotional intensity of it went, I was like, actually, no. Is this a fair reflection back at me, given this person has made such a chunk of my life? And I'm really proud of where I am, right? But I know that this is not where I'm going to stop. So the internal work looks like having, your tribe, but it's actually also looks like, being also open with your own self and that self-awareness, but not in a harsh way, because there's a difference, right? I know that I used to have like a harsh inner critique of, oh, you messed that up and you should have. Now it's like, That's information. Why do you think you did that? Let's unpack that for yourself. Okay, are you going to do better next time? Yeah. So I think the inner work is ongoing as well. So it's an ongoing journey. We never fully get there.
Thank you for sharing that story. I mean, that must have been upsetting.
Yes.
Yeah? Like, does it come back to what you were talking about earlier about how we show up in spaces and the intentionality and warmth and leaving people more fulfilled than when you arrived? And so I can't help but wonder what was going through that person's mind when they sent you that message, because it doesn't sound like that was filled with warmth and intentionality and trying to contact you and leave you more fulfilled than when they arrived. It seems like perhaps their intentions were maybe not well aligned.
To be honest, it was really hard. There were parts of that I took because it wasn't even written. So I had to listen to it over the phone, right?
Wow.
So I think that was really harder, and so you kind of sit with that. But I think there were glimpses of their heart through that, of going, I want bigger for you, but it came out really wrong. But also what it did, though, the gift that I gave to myself was that it highlighted, I reframed it, and it really highlighted that there were parts of me that still function from a deficit point. Like there's the parts of me that I think I still don't trust myself enough. And that came through having that conversation. So I actually don't regret having that conversation really with that person. In as much as it hurt me, I was like, oh, I can see the glimpses of me not thinking that I'm good enough. So that's the gift that I got from that conversation. And then the other things I chose to delete.
You had me through the last two responses, actually, thinking about, for me, I feel like there's a message there about it's a willingness to yarn and to talk about it with that cultural humility of doing so in the knowledge that I'm going to learn when I get feedback.
And then I have a question. Like, you've asked me questions. I have a question. What do you think stops people from having those those hard conversations as well around cultural inclusivity? Because you get into sometimes spaces where I think it's easier for us to speak about every beautiful thing that we're doing here around cultural safety and cultural humility. And there's a lot of good that's happening. But there's also a bit of kind of avoidance or discomfort with certain things. And curious what your observations have been.
Yeah. Well, I can probably just speak for myself, but I think when I find myself in that space, it's probably avoidance because I don't want to hurt anybody. Rather than take the risk of being aware that I carry biases into the conversation, rather than take a risk, sometimes I'm not feeling courageous enough and I go, I'm just going to avoid the conversation. That's just me.
Geez. I think that's a really, really hard question, because I suppose puts me in a position of trying to look at it from both sides, because I obviously experience it on the other side. I see people, I suppose, pick and choose which conversations they want to be a part of and what they choose to remain silent on. And I've seen people kind of pick and choose the reflections that they'd like to have around how they think they're doing, or how the organisation is doing, or how the team is doing in this space. And it's always really interesting, I suppose, what continues to go unsaid. But then I completely see people with such beautiful intention and heart out there really trying their best to step into these spaces and lean in. And then there is, of course, as you've raised, Justin, that anxiety and that fear. There's also, I think, a lot of stigma that surrounds this conversation. To be reflectful of yourself and to potentially come out with a result that maybe you have been casually racist, maybe not now, maybe at some point in the past. That's actually a really confronting thought. And that's a reflection for everybody. That's not just any culture and have that reflection of yourself. So I think there's almost an element of, if you have to dig that deep and that's the potential outcome, that is challenging as well, I think, for people, particularly for people who genuinely in their heart want to try. Even more so, I think that's a really kind of hard place to land.
There's a lot of things that you said I almost want to just reflect back in my answer to your question. Like, I think so much of it is around that intentionality, but you've got to be mindful of it. You know, you said right at the start, it has to start from our mind and that everyone has to do the work. So if we're not conscious of it, we've got to be conscious of how we're showing up in the space. We've got to be conscious of including everyone. If we're not conscious of it, how can we do the work? So I think we have to start there. Then we have to make the intentional effort to do the work. I think sometimes, though, there's a fear. Like, I think there's a fear to upset what is seen as the status quo. And then there's also that element of who does it serve? And I think there are times where people don't do things because it maybe serves themselves and they don't realize that that's actually contributing to a bigger dynamic. If I'm calling that out, am I doing the right thing? Am I looking into things that aren't really there? Am I reading into it too much? Is it also my responsibility to do that as a white, almost middle-aged man? And there are times where I've called things out and then I've gone, sure, if I should have. But if I don't, will someone else? And I'm conscious that it's, you know, there's that fear, but then there's trying to take responsibility, and it can be really hard to wrestle with that internally. And when do you call things out and when do you not?
Yeah. And, you know, my curiosity around that is around calling things out, you know, or calling things in, or calling things out in spaces and having that kind of reaction, whether it's your nervous system going, oh, I don't know if it's landed, or now it's exposing me, or I'm a bit vulnerable. One of the things that I've learned is to kind of lean into why I'm feeling dysregulated at that time. And even with conviction and something that you know to be true, it doesn't mean that you won't have a reaction internally, right? So I've been in spaces where I've called things out, and calling things out and any liberation work, because we can't say we're doing cultural humility and cultural inclusiveness without that piece of work around liberating people that are feeling oppressed, right? And part of that is I've learned that there's not always an applause when you do that, because people are now sitting and having to really reflect and look at the ways that they've walked in the world, including myself, you know, my journey to being here and being decolonial and an ongoing journey. It's filled with so many things that I look back at now and going, gosh, you were a little bit lost then. There's some growing that you needed to do. So sometimes in my calling out, did I harm anyone? Did I use language that was harmful? If the answer is no, I'm like, okay. So that little bit of discomfort, I have to lean into it and know that you never know. There's a moment for that person. They might not declare it in that moment, but they've walked away with a teachable moment that they will never forget.
Yeah, I resonate with probably that idea that, I think it does carry shame for me around past behaviour conversation as well. Just quickly, I'm interested in that calling it in.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to talk to that a little bit? Because I've never heard that term before.
Yeah, I use that a lot when I'm doing a lot of work around any anti-racism work. You know, I wish I could claim that I coined it. No, not really. It's through doing a lot of work. And what's happened is we were talking earlier on about people doing this amazing work around anti-racism work within schools. And, you know, a lot of research says that, you know, young people have learned it from somewhere. And often, sometimes you have to be quite attuned. Sometimes calling out doesn't necessarily transform the behavior. It might stop it, like in public, or going, I don't want to get into trouble with the teacher, so I'm not going to use that language in a classroom. But when I'm on the street, I'm going to use it. But when you call in, you actually try and tap into people's empathy and emotions and going, your behavior is actually quite harmful. This is why it is harmful. And they found that it really transforms the behavior, not just in certain spaces, but as they are intentional about going, okay, my goodness, my behavior is quite harmful. Now I'm willing to change that. So I think it's different ways in calling out. Like, how dare you? That's actually not right. How dare you be harmful or whatever it is? So yes, there's a difference.
I love that expression, and I love that explanation as well. It's like prohibition, right? When you ban something, you just push it somewhere else. You're actually playing around with the symptoms and not the root causes. Yeah, rather than calling out, how do we call in? I love it. Thank you for sharing that.
I am loving it as well. And it's really, I just think it's a beautiful kind of summation of really this whole conversation that we're having around when we're talking about why are people feeling, not comfortable to kind of lean into these conversations. Maybe it's because we really do have to consider how we bring people into conversation and the journey that we take them on to get them there. And it really is only by tapping into motivation and intention and what sits at the heart of that feeling, really kind of digging into that space. That's where the change happens. That's where the growth happens. Simply calling it out is step one, baseline, but there's so much more to go to see that change happen. So powerful, Simangaliso. I love that. I'm going to take that and steal that immediately.
Please do. Sharing is caring.
Well, we've been on quite a journey already. I think we're going to have you back because I feel like we haven't even scratched the surface here. We like to round off with a bit of a key takeaway. And so if there's a key takeaway from the conversation, what would it be? I'm struggling to choose one, Simangaliso. This is amazing. I think, first of all, we're going to have to call this episode Backpack of Dreams. Because I just thought that was a beautiful analogy and imagery. Maybe this sums it up really well for me, the expression about how we show up into spaces. I feel like that captures a lot. It captures a lot around the intentionality, the kindness, leaving a conversation with the other person feeling more fulfilled than when you arrived into the conversation. Who do things serve? I feel like a lot of it is captured in that and calling things in. Yeah, I think that's my key takeaway. Smita, Justin, do you have a key takeaway yet?
There's so much. I'm really reflecting, I think, deeply on so much of the conversation and the stories that you've shared, Simangaliso. I think I'm actually really just sitting with your story. I think I found that really powerful. I'm so grateful that you've shared that with us today, just your own journey, courage, resilience, growth, and to hear those voices that kind of keep coming out to push you down or to tell you something about yourself that you know not to be true, and how you've gone on a journey to really continue to find yourself and find that kind of center and anchor in yourself of who you are and who you want to be and where you want to go. And you're living your life with that authenticity. And the fact that you are using that to support others in your role is just so inspirational and powerful. So thank you so much for sharing that story.
Yeah, Simangaliso, it's similar for me in that I feel like you've been so generous in sharing your story, and it feels like a real privilege to be in that conversation with story. I couldn't pick one because I think I'm going to have to reflect on this for a while. I've learned so much. But probably one takeaway from me is at MacKillop, we're really lucky in when we think about cultural consideration, there's lots of places where we can have conversations. And I think I'm going to throw myself to those conversations after this discussion. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you for having me. Yeah. I think the thing that kind of stands out for me and that I'm really surprised about is I didn't even think this is the direction our conversation was going to go. So surprised. Yeah, but it was just natural, organic, and just a feeling. I'm excited. We could have gone for 3 hours.
Oh, I think we're gonna have a few more. I'm not gonna hold you to that. And I think the thing that we've found so far is we seem to go deep really fast.
Mm-hmm.
We went deep very, very quickly, and we like it to be really organic, and we want to just have a conversation and see where it goes. And I think to round us out, just a massive thank you to you and for not only giving us some time to do this, but for your sharing and for your story and your wisdom and your insights. And it's been really wonderful to hear from you, and can't wait to have you back again and do another episode. So, Simangaliso, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.